Welcome back to the Insurgent Mindset. I'm Matt Tice.
And I'm Rondo Moses. This is a podcast about challenger thinking in a world shaped by disruption.
And in each episode, we explore strategies and leadership mindsets that help businesses break from the pack and stay ahead in fast-changing markets.
So you'll hear conversations, case studies, and insights from leaders who are applying these mindsets to thrive in this uncertain environment.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and check out our companion blogs at insurgentsgroup.com for a summary of takeaways from each episode. Now, let's get on to today's conversation. We have Renae Hanvin from Resilient Ready, who's a crusader for resilience in the small business economy. Welcome, Renae.
Hi,
Hi,
Matt.
Renee.
Hey, how you going?
Good to have you on the podcast today. We're really excited to hear your story. And so, Renee, build us a picture. Who's Renee? Where did you come from? And where are you?
So, Renee is just a small town girl from Australia who had a dream. No, I have a crisis management and stakeholder engagement background, and then worked very much in the corporate sector. So, for some big names. And I was responding to national crisis response for McDonald's in Australia when the swine flu hit. And I was like, well, this is really interesting in the sense of how a corporate sort of responds to a big global kind of, pandemic type thing. And then kept going along, worked in corporate social responsibility, worked for a few other big brands, worked at Australia Post, which is our national postal service, and watched basically how Brisbane flooded. And I was looking at the small franchisees of the National Postal Office and how they were really struggling. So this weird kind of, I guess, passion and, optimism in me was like, there's got to be a better way to do it. So I very unexpectedly got made redundant when I was just putting my first child back into daycare, which was a big personal change, life change. I was like, okay, what am I going to do now? And then someone said, you need to consult because you've got great approaches and ideas. And so, yeah, for 12 years, I've been consulting, and then I am where I am today. So CEO and founder of Resilient Ready. We're a certified social enterprise in disaster resilience. So talk about disasters and disruptions. That's what I do every day.
Okay, that's great. And so we talk a lot in the podcast about sort of the insurgent and the incumbent mindset. So maybe start us off with giving us a bit of formative experience with Australia Post and McDonald's, and talk to us about how these big, complex organizations are dealing with these challenges, and then draw us a line to small business and how that might be different.
Yeah, well, I mean, it has been 12 years since I've been in the corporate world. So I guess a little bit of change might have kind of been
Right.
there. But I think, as we know, corporates are, they're big corporate entity beasts. They have their strategic priorities. They're typically slow to change. They think they're innovative, but I would probably think perhaps not. I did when I was at Australia Post try to get up pretty much a version of what I'm doing now. And it was, yeah, that's great. Yep, no, it's not in the, I guess, what's the current theme of the time? And I think back then it was, we do sustainability and, we didn't have the disasters, so resilience wasn't a thing. Moving into small businesses, gosh, I mean, we have to be resilient every day. I have learned so much. I think differently. I am so much more connected, I guess, to my community and to the real needs of that grassroots, small business. I think, do you know what I mean? Just the mums, pops, dads who are literally working every single day to bring in a living, to do what they love, to drive some positive change. So I guess I've had to build my own resilience being a small business owner, which I guess I didn't have to have in the corporate world. So that's probably been the biggest challenge. But I'm so passionate about what I'm doing, and I don't care that I've started small because we are growing, and I know what we're doing needs to be embedded into government, into corporate. So I am absolutely on a mission.
Perfect.
Wow, sounds really interesting. So you really identified a problem that needed to be solved. Like one of the first things we talk to clients about when they're defining a strategy is identify the problem you're trying to solve. You have a clear problem that you're trying to solve for. When you think about small businesses, how do you frame small businesses in Australia? Like what size employees? How big are these small businesses?
Yeah, typically in Australia, small businesses are up to about 19 employees. So you have micro businesses. So you've got, I guess, solopreneurs. So, the one man or one person, setup. They're just consulting or setting up whatever they are themselves. Then you have the micro businesses, which is typically up to about 4 employees. So again, really teeny tiny. And then small businesses are up to 19 employees typically, all sorts of ranges in profits and money, etc. Again, I mean, we can have lots of employees not making a lot of money, and we can have teeny tiny businesses making a lot. So that's typically how we approach it in Australia.
Hmm.
So Renae, then looking at these small businesses, and let's be honest, in Australia, we're a crisis-prone sort of place. There's a flood here, a cyclone there, bushfire over here. Next thing, it's a meteorite, right? It's happening all the time. And I think your
Mm.
comment earlier about, the big corporates not being able to see past the end of their nose. When you're in survival mode as a small business, sort of going from month to month, quarter to quarter, year to year, just trying to kind of survive. Um, how do you sort of get them into the mindset of setting aside additional resources to think ahead about, these major issues that, are on the horizon? Maybe they're insured, underinsured, not sure, but it's probably not top of mind for many of these businesses. So how do you turn that mindset to really understand what resilience is all about and the upsides and downsides of putting aside resources?
Yeah, Matt, you're so true. So, for the typical small and even medium business owner, I mean, you're just literally in survival mode. I would say for the vast majority at the moment, you're literally just trying to stay in business with all the economic uncertainties and the increases in costs and, staff challenges and regulations, etc. So, I've not met, well, maybe apart from myself, but I've not met many small business owners that wake up in the morning and go, how am I going to be resilient and ready today? Like, it just doesn't happen.
Mm.
And I think, it's also complex. It's seen as negative. The talk of business continuity comes with a kind of an alignment to, complexity and costly, and I don't understand that, so I'm not even going to try. So over the past, I guess, 6 or 7 years, when I've been in the small business resilience space, very much focus on, I guess, we flip the switch. We also create initiatives that are led by the behaviors of the small business people. So it's not, here's a 40-page business continuity plan that you need to tick the box. We break it down into 5-minute intervals and focus on one thing. So it's led by a concept called nudge theory. So rather than trying to get people to kind of like, complete this document and go, oh, I think I've done it. It's like, no. We want you to think different and do different every day when you do
Mm.
business. So one of the modules we do is like linchpin. So, are you the linchpin for your business, or who's the linchpin? And it works really well with like farmers. So again, they're, really long generational, really, connected to their business. They probably know, or, there's one farmer typically who knows maybe how to start the generator or how to do the, main milking the cows or whatever it might be. So go and film it, record yourself doing it, or get someone recording yourself, save it securely, and then share it with 5 people, 5 trusted people. So if something happens to you or you go on a holiday, for goodness sakes, then someone else can do it. So we really break down those, what's your backup power. We talk a lot about insurance. We have insurance catch-ups that are really fun. And yeah, just break down all those nuances. I know, who'd have thought an insurance catch-up would be a small business person. And what's really important to me is I have a great team who work with me who have lived experience. So Fiona Jago, for example, ran a caravan park on Kangaroo Island. They got absolutely impacted by the bushfires there in 2019. She also saved 200 people's lives because she was
Mm.
the only person there responsible for ensuring that they got out safely. She liaised with the emergency services, etc. So these small business people are trying to sort of survive, but to the other hand, and the work we're doing most recently, they are critical connectors and people in the, economic, social connectors in those communities as well. So we need to think differently about the role of small businesses.
Yeah. And Renee, so is the focus primarily on natural disasters, or are you also thinking about like disasters, economic disasters, and things like that. Because resilience, I mean, that applies to the work that we do as well, right? We're really trying to build resilient organizations. So do you translate that concept into how you run your business as well, in terms of, are you building a resilient business?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, my integrity is really high, and I'm a social enterprise, so I'm really about, I guess, the cause as opposed to the profits. So
Right.
it's really important for me to set up Resilient Ready as a resilient business itself. And it wasn't at the start when I couldn't, I was just me. But now, yeah, I live and breathe the systems and processes, I guess, that I share. And I think, to your first question, disasters and disruptions, we do all hazards or all types, because we work very much to the rule of the 80-20 rule. So I know you use that a lot in profit and efficiencies for businesses, but when it comes to disasters, 80% of the impacts from any type of natural hazard or natural disaster, or just like a power outage or a consequence-led disaster, is going to be the same. So if you can build the knowledge and the capabilities and the mindset and the processes to respond to 80% at once, then it doesn't really
Mm.
matter what the cause is. And then you just have to be worried about, okay, if it is a flood, I might need sandbags. If it is a bushfire, we do need to evacuate. If it is a power outage, I need a backup. So that's very much what we instill. So don't think of it as you need separate approaches and plans for different types. Do the 80-20 rule, create one plan, which can pretty much help you for everything.
Hmm.
Interesting.
So, Renae, why don't you walk us through Resilient Ready as an organization? What's your sort of vision for the business? Where is it in its life cycle? Where do you see it coming from? Where does the funding come from? Give us a 360.
Oh, Matt. So I'm certainly in, I guess, the business horizons. And I see myself right now as though I'm probably graduating from primary school, going into secondary school, from a business perspective. So I have put in blood, sweat, tears for the past, 10 years or so, getting people to kind of understand what I'm talking about. And, I've received lots of grant money. I've piloted a lot of programs. A lot of those programs for business communities are being funded and procured by governments, procured by corporates. I'm talking to corporates about setting up certification, again, linking into insurance so that we can really build the knowledge and the behavior changes in small businesses. So that's one side of the fence. But the other side of the fence is that I've seen for many, many years, I guess, the vital role and the opportunity of the people behind the businesses in communities across Australia as connectors and informers. So we last year won $1 million to deliver a pilot program of bringing Professor Daniel Aldrich's global research on social capital and social infrastructure to Australia. And we just launched it a couple of weeks ago at sociably.resilientready.org. And what this is it's evidence and data. So we now have, and Australia is leading a world first in terms of how we show the data of how connected communities are, which is vital when it comes to disaster preparedness, and it saves lives in disaster recovery, but also those places and spaces like the pubs, the cafe, the caravan park, the role that they play in building community connections and then helping save lives and livelihoods when disasters occur. So it's been a long journey. Matt, you've known a little bit of it, but basically, yeah, I'm now entering that new business horizon of going into a secondary school with university and global world domination, of course, on the cards.
So, Renae,
Yeah.
just a follow up, and then I'll hand it over to you, Rondo. Rondo and I are metrics nerds. So, when you start talking about metrics, we're like, okay, this is interesting. So, how you're measuring connectedness and sort of what does that data bring to the table in terms of either making better decisions about how governments or even corporates or small business can allocate resources. But let's start with connectedness. Like, what's that metric and what does it mean? Curious.
So social capital, I guess, is a notion of connectedness. So social capital, and again, Professor Daniel Aldrich, who's a Boston academic, has been doing this work since he was impacted personally by Hurricane Katrina. So he's done a lot of research and work in Japan and America, etc. So in terms of social capital is the trust, connections, and cooperation between people. So when you think about when a disaster occurs, Yes, you might have the warning systems. Yes, there might be a road or a levee, etc. But it is your neighbor next door or the people around you who tell you of the warnings, who tell you need to leave, and who help you in that kind of response and recovery that is really fundamental. But up until now, we don't measure it, or we can't measure it, and we haven't measured it. And so that means that it's actually been, in my opinion, and we did a snapshot project last year in South Australia, it's the missing piece of the disaster resilience ecosystem, because we can measure data of risks, vulnerabilities, fire risks, flood risks, et cetera, et cetera. But we don't overlay the connections or the human factor. So it's quite groundbreaking in terms of how we think about resilient communities by how connected they are. Now, the work of Professor Aldrich is that connected communities are more resilient than affluent communities. So if you think about that, so you don't need to be rich to be connected. In fact, if you're, less down the scale, you're potentially more connected. But what we're measuring is using ABS data insights in Australia. Really important. We spent 7 weeks going around Australia to connect with all the states and territories to see what they wanted the data to be and what they wanted to utilize it for. So that was obviously for purpose. And so we have our little, proprietary metrics as to how we look at that data. We qualitatively and quantitatively validated the data by 4 ways, which Professor Aldrich has never had someone make sure that the data was right so many times, I think, in his professional career. Because to me, I'm not a data nerd, right? So I'm more interested in the pretty colors that's on the map and what what we can do with the data. So it was really, really important for me that I was comfortable that the data was right for Australia and that I was comfortable in saying this data is really going to help us. So there's 2 sides. So we measure the connectedness. So we have bonding, bridging, and linking ties. Bonding ties are connections with people similar to us, like our family, our close friends. They're the ones who are going to be there when a disaster occurs. Bridging ties, so you and I, Matt Rondo and I, would be bridging ties. So we've got different backgrounds, different life experiences. Bridging ties are really fundamental for opportunities and information. So if a community or a neighborhood in a community needs to have connections outside of their very close networks to really have a thriving life. And then linking ties are connections into those in power and authority, so decision makers and influencers, so councils, governments, etc. So if you've got a community that has strong bonding ties, strong bridging ties, and strong linking ties, that is your perfectly connected community. But the majority of communities have relatively strong bonding ties, mainly the regional communities, not so much the city communities. Bridging ties are typically low, and that certainly impacts and reflects like social cohesion differences, etc., and gaps and needs to kind of build that. And then linking ties are also typically low because the vast majority of us don't trust government, etc. So this data is really fundamental in helping governments, councils, local communities, corporates see where are the communities that are not they don't trust, they're not connected, they're not cooperating, and how can we then put focus of funding and investment to drive positive change there.
Okay, so the theory then is the correlation between that and resilience is very high. Is that right? Yep.
Yeah,
I
100%.
can see the heat map in my mind right
Yeah.
now. Okay.
Yeah. And then we also map. So what also is new is we're mapping social infrastructure. So we've recognized there's 4 categories of social infrastructure and we've identified Australian variants for them. So social infrastructure are the places and spaces that foster connections, particularly bridging ties. So connections with people different to you. So your parks, your footy fields, your cafes, your churches, your community centres, libraries. So again, when Australians and corporates and when people invest in infrastructure, roads, levees, dams get, first sort of funding. But what about the community centre, the library, the pub, let's keep them in business because they're the trusted places in our communities that, mean something to our communities as well, much more than a road or a bridge or whatever it might be.
Okay.
Interesting. So Renae, you said you'd been in this work prior to starting your own 12 years ago. What have you observed in terms of the innovation that has happened in this space, let's say over the past 5 to 7 years or so? And where do you see things headed to sort of further improve social capital and infrastructure?
Yeah, well, social capital, I mean, to be honest with you, it's really just coming on the map. And we launched the National Social Capital and Social Infrastructure Measurement Framework for Australia again just last week. 12 years
Oh,
ago, it wasn't even a thing. So again, I was talking about this kind of concept, and everyone's like, oh, that's really nice, Renae. Yeah, go you type thing, but they don't get it. So I've literally had to wait for the sector to kind of catch up. And then I have had to work my little behind off to really get people thinking about it as social capital and social infrastructure. So I've done a lot of work in the background, a lot of advocacy, a lot of education, again, bringing the global professor across to Australia to say, I think we need this. And then I've had to get, I guess, all the people across the sector sort of self-realize, oh yeah, actually this would benefit us. So, and as we know, data is everything. But I think, innovation in the disaster resilience space, well, that's quite a kind of an interesting topic and might need a podcast on its own. But I would
yeah.
argue for the vast majority, the innovation has been focused on emergency management and emergency response, fires, the different types of fires, how it comes, winds, et cetera, et cetera. No focus on the people and the people connections at that grassroots level. And I think that's where the change we're driving, like this launching the project recently, is a huge innovation. Like I can't tell you, and it's not just because it's mine, it's huge.
Right.
It really is going to change. And not just disasters. This is relevant to social cohesion. It's relevant to health and human services. It's relevant to crime. We know communities that are connected. There's less crime. So there's so many different areas of livability whereby this is relevant to as well.
Renae, I'm going to try to stretch your brain a little bit.
Okay.
Rondo and I in our business, we deal with, in many cases, organizations that are facing, for example, competitive disruption or economic disruption, at some scale, right? So I'd like to extrapolate up your thinking about this concept in that context and how that might apply to organizational systems. So organizational social cohesion or other things. And equally, I'm interested in, and we see this all the time, the mindset of leaders are really uncomfortable with dealing with disruption in a sense that that's something that's, on the horizon or may never happen. And they like to be in this sort of safe homeostatic space, which is, keep things steady, don't change too much, don't invest, don't innovate.
Yeah.
And so are the things that you've learned, can they be scaled up to deal with these bigger kinds of problems like in a corporate sense, corporate disruption, or in a global sense, climate change, for example? How would we think about that in the first case where you're a CEO, you're a board, and you're being faced by, you're under threat from, say, disruption from a competitor? Just give us some thinking on that. Oh, we lost your sound
Oh,
there.
we lost your sound.
Can you hear me?
You're back. We
Yeah.
got you.
Oh,
Yep,
Now you're
there it
back.
is.
Look, and again, I mean, it's been a little while of being in the corporate world, but I think the world that we're playing in and technology, etc., is moving so quickly. It's, so there are so many disruptions. And I think, any organization that is just thinking, oh no, where we are now is absolutely fine, you're not going to survive and you're not going to, I guess, you're not future-proofing your business as well. So,
Right.
I mean, corporate social responsibility is obviously one of the first budgets to get cut, pretty much, alongside marketing and that, when you're sort of tightening and squeezing. But at the end of the day, if you can invest into your customers, your communities, your employees, if you can understand the real connections in terms of your culture and that, that's absolutely gold. But again, that's not an easy, that's not customer sales, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, and I've worked with a lot of big corporates, and I've worked with some utility, I don't want to say where, but some utility entities. And so one example is that I've just recently been working with 4 competitors in a utility space. So they're not direct competitors, they do have different geographical areas. And we've been embedding social capital into their disaster resilience and regulatory requirements. So they now have this whole new approach as to the benefits of this data and how it can help them in terms of the strategic business priorities that they're all focusing on separately, but we're also bringing them together so they can do a little bit. They can keep being separate, but they can do it together so they can learn, again, part of it together. They can, challenge their own innovations in a collective format, but do it separately. And it's awesome to see, because it really is the leaders are the ones who are like, like I didn't know that this was sort of like kind of easier to do. And now that I understand what it is, right, we should have been doing this years ago. It's like, well, no time like the present. So I think bringing any innovation that you don't have evidence, you don't have data for, is obviously a challenge. But yeah, I mean, what we're doing is, I mean, corporates are absolutely on our list, and we've already started talking to a few as well.
Yeah, because I think, oh, go ahead, Rondo.
No, I was going to say, as you were talking, I'm thinking this would have such strong application inside an organization. When you think about organizational performance, execution, if you can improve the connections within teams, across teams, within business units, that capital, and be able to assess the level of trust within those various parts, that is powerful, because that's how work gets done, right? That's how you ultimately create value for customers, if the whole system is working effectively together. And so understanding that social capital would be powerful to me.
Oh, 1,000%. And I can't tell you, there is probably not one corporate that I've got into and I haven't introduced like senior people from different business units. And it's typically like the business resilience or business continuity or risk management with, say, the corporate social responsibility. And they will have both been working there probably for 5 or so years, but they've never connected. And it's just like, hello, bridging ties, you need to bond.
Sure, but those bridging ties, and I think the thing I find interesting about the way you've articulated your approach is that these things have benefit regardless of the disaster, right? So in a sense of like your example with the farmer understanding the generator, that's valuable regardless of whether or not there's a fire, a flood, or a hurricane, whatever it might be. And I think extrapolating that up to the corporate environment, to Rondo's point, sort of that social cohesion is valuable independent of corporate social responsibility as a driver of execution and flexibility and agility,
Right.
in terms of being able to, I guess we always talk about being able to deploy resources more efficiently to things that matter. That's your 80-20 rule. But finding that sort of benefit where these investments have that dual purpose of making us more fit, but at the same time more resilient. Do I have that right?
Matt, yes, come and help pitch with me, please. So 100%. And I think, a lot of people think about, well, you work in disasters, so you're just about, disaster response and recovery. That couldn't be further from the truth, because if we put focus and investment into preparedness or building resilience and building connected communities just as an everyday, livability, we're going to be happier, we're going to be healthier, we're going to be safer, we're going to, and from that corporate perspective, exactly the same. You're going to have teams working, together. You're going to have so much more trust in your organization. You'll then have trust to build great initiatives and also build trust with your customers and your suppliers. So there's so many benefits to, I guess, this different approach of
so it's
thinking.
on one hand, you're going to be more productive, right? And on the other hand, you're going to be more resilient. To me, that sounds great.
Yeah,
That's the win-win,
100%.
right?
Yeah, more productive and more
But
prepared.
it's
So
it's
100%.
interesting. So in the world of in the corporate world, I think that people are much more open to the first part of that, make me more productive, and
Yeah.
they would probably see the resilience more as a byproduct as compared to
Oh,
make me more resilient and productivity is the byproduct. Is that fair as kind of the balance of focus?
yeah, 100%. Absolutely. I guess a bit like, small businesses, preparing for the disasters. It's like, yeah, it won't happen to me. I don't have time. It's too complex. Like, dare I say it, it's very similar conversations for corporates. And I would argue that the, disaster preparedness side of corporates is, for the majority, very bespoke to the risk manager, one person,
Yeah.
the risk
Yeah.
manager. So if you've got a big corporate and you've got all types of disasters and hazards that can impact your productivity or resilience, it shouldn't be one person. It should be across the whole organization. It should be part of, like, resilience should be part of your culture across every person that works for your business. And that's another
So Renae, so I've got to ask you the question then.
yeah.
If that logic fits, then is the pitch about productivity, and does the data show that, well, it's, you go to your website, it's very interesting, sort of up to 15 times return on
Yeah.
every dollar invested in resilience, particularly if the worst case does happen, it
Yep.
does pay off.
Yeah.
And those ROI statistics stats are great. And I can't help but wonder if you're able to tell that productivity story, right? These investments have a 4x implication to productivity, then potentially it's an easier sell to get people engaged, and probably also an easier sell, particularly here in Australia. Rondo and I have talked about this in other podcasts, where we are in a productivity crisis, really, as a nation. We are just not punching at our potential for national productivity. So I find it really interesting, as maybe a place to start heading, of how you take all this data that you've created, correlate that to productivity, and tell a bigger story. Just throwing it out there. Yeah.
Matt, don't worry, that's one of about 30 things that's currently on the thing board. So we have absolutely started talking to some academics and some other people around, I guess, quantifying the value of social capital. But I guess, the hard part is, and again, I don't want to just quantify it so it's a number for the sake of a number. I'm all about really validating what it is. And if because the neighbor next door, and then there is a whatever disaster disruption, and they save your life, like, I don't know, is that worth $5,000 or is that priceless? I don't know. It's quite tricky in that hard in the sense, but absolutely over the next 12 months, we're absolutely moving into quantifying the value of connections, both in corporate, government, and communities.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because if you could tell that farmer he's going to increase his yields by, 5%,
Yep.
I guarantee you that farmer will make that investment,
Yep.
as compared to, I'm going to give you a 15 times return if the disaster happens, but the disaster might not happen. Well, maybe I'm not as worried about that right now because it's not in front of my face. But I do think it's interesting, and I love the data-centric approach to be able to really dig in and understand how these factors actually do turn the dial one way or the other. I think that's really, quite well. That's innovative in its own
In of
right.
itself. Yeah.
Not
I
seen
actually
that
was
kind
thinking,
of rigor in this area previously.
I was actually thinking, what if you could use your social capital concept to, as we say, focus on the corporate and improved the trust within teams and across business units. And if you could show that that supports, higher employee retention and
Yeah.
satisfaction and customer lifetime value growth, like that's really powerful. Like that's really what productivity is about, right? Those are the metrics that you want to really look at. So I think it's a really interesting concept to even lie to corporate. I remember a couple years ago, I think it was back in our early collaborative days, Matt, Monitor had a similar kind of approach with team performance.
Hmm.
But it was all focused around building team trust. But this is like another level of it, and I think would be really powerful.
Interesting. So, Renae, we like to talk about business models on this podcast. Can you take us through, like, how your model, because I think we haven't had a social enterprise CEO on the podcast yet, and I think people are going to be wondering, like, what is a social enterprise, and how does the model work? Where does the funding come from? How do you pay your staff? How do you create and turn these ideas into value, Renae? Can
Yeah.
you just take us through that for a moment?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a very proud social enterprise. So when I set up, everyone was like, you've got to become a not-for-profit. And I was like, but I don't feel right, like, building things as a not-for-profit when I'm sort of, building them for profit-making businesses. So I
Mhm.
discovered the notion of a social enterprise. So really we're I guess, a commercial business for good. So where you could say halfway between a for-profit and a not-for-profit, but we have to operate as a profit. So we're certified by Social Traders. It's the main certification house in Australia. We operate as a typical business. We are only really meant to get up to 50% of our funding through grants, and then the rest has to be commercial. So there's a bit of leeway as you're building things, but ultimately you want to be a commercially operating business. So there's a few variations of social enterprises. I guess the most obvious version is, say, a real estate agency might have a percentage profit that they donate to homeless women, or they do for affordable housing, or whatever it might be. Mine's a little bit different because I do things differently all the time. So ours is actually embedded in our whole trust deed of our business. Everything that we do is about building disaster resilience. So we are a full-on social enterprise, and really, deliver a lot for good, but then also win grants, and then also procure into governments, corporates, industry associations. And industry associations is another really interesting area of social capital too, because if you think about those industry associations of competitor kind of corporates, there's a lot that can be done in that space as well.
So again, those connections, right? That those organizations are designed for building those connections, I suppose. So then on the commercial side, Renae, just take us through like the offering, like what do you offer and what does that look like? So is it training? Is it conferences? Is it consulting? Like what are the things you're actually offering? Grants we can get our heads around.
Yeah, so we have quite a lot, quite diverse offerings. So we offer workshops and small business resilience programs, typically to state governments and to councils. We're also talking to corporates at the moment wanting to build their suppliers and their customers. We do, paid keynotes. We do advisory. We do a lot of advisory into governments and corporates as well in terms of their business community resilience, their social capital, etc. And then now we have the new Sociably data platform and advisory. So we launched the platform with some pilot communities, but we've already got states and international interest about bespoke projects as well. So we can do bespoke data projects as well. So yeah.
Okay, so that last bit's really interesting. So the first bit you described is almost like a professional services business model. But then the data model. So are you offering that on a subscription basis or transactionally? What's the model for data?
Yeah, so there's a few at the moment. So we're waiting for grant funding to see if we get to scale up the pilot work we've done across all of Australia, which then means that all Australian communities, and what's really unique about the data is it's down at the SA1 neighbourhood level, which is the lowest statistical data level you can get. Not many other data is down at that level. So then it would be free as part of our social enterprise. So free for people to see at that data at that SA1 level. But basically, licensing modules, bespoke project modules, a whole variety. And again, as a social enterprise, I'm really about needs led. So what do you need and what's the outcome? Not the output. We can sort the output. What's the outcome that you want the data to be helpful for? And then we work with organizations, but it's also training. I mean, not a lot of people understand really social capital and social infrastructure. So again, we want the data to be used for good. So again, a lot of training and advisory can come with that as well to help you really understand how it can benefit your organization or your government or your community.
Okay, great. I can imagine some of our listeners in marketing will be drooling over some of that granular data at the at the grassroots level. I can imagine already plenty of ways to leverage that really great data. So Renae, we're going to run out of time, but I think it'd be really interesting. We always ask our guests this question. What advice would you have for leaders to help them build a mindset that's conducive to resilience in this case, and more broadly, the insurgent mindset, how to think differently about this?
Yeah, I mean, again, we touched on before, I think it's very easy to sit in your comfort sheet, your comfort seat and think, no, this is how I do it. And this has been successful. So off we go. I think you've got to be like considerate of thinking differently and doing differently, still within your kind of comfort zone per se. But, if someone like me comes, and says something to you, don't go, oh, that's really nice, Renae, good luck with that. Really talk with me to say, what does it actually mean for your business and for the strategic direction and for the outcome that you want to get to? Because I have never left a conversation without someone having aha moment. And it might be small steps, it might be big steps, but there's always something that you can do if you get the right person who wants to kind of bring in the right approach that's not something you've ever known before.
Terrific. Randall,
So
I'll let you
someone
have
who's
the last word.
curious.
Sorry?
I would say someone who's curious. They have to be curious and interested and inquisitive about what it is, right? As opposed to dismissing it, out of hand.
100% Rondo, yeah, because it's so easy to say, yeah, okay, I'll catch up with you. You've asked me 50 times. I'll just tick the box and catch up with you. Yes, yes, whatever.
Right.
But again, if you are really listen to what they're saying and really think like, what could that mean for me? Not necessarily are they saying, that's right for me, but what could that mean for me? Because there's different ways of applying the data and applying the knowledge into businesses that can have really huge effects. And again, anyone who wants to be a leader in this space, from a marketing, a corporate social responsibility, a social impact, a disaster resilience space, come chat, because we are ready to go.
Awesome.
Perfect. That's a great way to wrap up. And I'm sure, so Renae, how do they do that? How do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so if you just go to resilientready.org, all our details are there, including the new Sociably Arm, which is our bespoke part on social capital.
All right, I'm sure that you'll get plenty of hits on that. And well, Renae, on behalf of the Insurgent Mindset, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a really great way to start out today, which I believe is Halloween. So, great insights, great energy. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you on board.
Oh, thanks.
It's a pleasure, Renae.
Thanks so much.
Well, Rondo, Renae was fantastic sharing with us her perspectives on all things resilience and social capital.
Yeah, I mean, it was great to have her perspective from a social enterprise. I just thought the ideas were really interesting, and I could see certainly a lot of application on the commercial side. So very interesting stuff.
Yeah, I can't imagine being on the other side of the table with her and saying no.
Right.
Sort of lots of energy, very passionate.
Energy. Yeah.
But
Knows
the
her
themes
stuff.
keep coming back over and over again, right? In terms of the need to be in that mindset of resilience, the need to to be able to deploy your resources effectively to find that win-win benefit that we talked about. I thought that was fantastic. I think that any leader should be thinking about, how do I create a more resilient business, but at the same time use those techniques to create more productivity. I think that dual purpose is really valuable, and I think Renae highlighted that very effectively.
Yeah. And you and I have often, talked about how organizations need to ask themselves whether they're resilient. That's one of the questions that we used to ask in one of our earlier diagnostics. How resilient is your organization against disruptions?
Hmm.
And we were thinking about it more from, the competitors or technology, changing customer needs and behavior, like that kind of disruption. But yeah, that gets to resilience. So I think that she has something very interesting there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the meteor coming out from outer space is going to be just as disruptive as a pandemic, as disruptive as an Amazon or a
And
Google coming to
Amazon,
take your
right?
business. So, it's kind of like these themes are universally applicable, but like we always say, it's sort of like in this world where we live in this short term, deliver results now, it's really hard to take that step back and think about, what are the things that are going to make us make our models more robust and resilient to the change that's coming. Just doesn't get enough attention. So I think that Renae's data-driven approach is something new, in a sense that, these concepts are theoretically attractive, but without the data to really demonstrate the ROI and the benefit for the business, it's harder to imagine seeing how that capital will flow to the capital and mind share will flow to these sorts of issues. So I think that's a really important idea, and let's encourage our listeners to dig more deeply into that. So anyway, Rondo,
Absolutely.
thank you very much. It was a great guest, and we'll look forward to hearing about Renae's future endeavors and how that goes. And we'll talk to you next time.
Absolutely. Awesome show, Matt.
Okay, great. So for our listeners, you can find this podcast on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and we'd encourage you to visit insurgentsgroup.com. for the upcoming transcript and article that will flow from this podcast. Should be out in a week or two. Great, Rondo. All the best.
Have a good one.